There's a whole lot of stuff going on around the world at the moment. Of course, one of the focuses we've had in conversation recently, and finally it's gaining some traction in the Western press, is the situation with those grubs with Boko Haram and the hijacking, if you will, the extortion of over 200 Christian girls in Nigeria. But the big story that is bubbling along in the international press, and it seems to come up to the headlines and then drift down to page 20 and then up she comes again, is what is taking place in Ukraine. But the question really is not that is something going on there. We can all see that there are military personnel and there is agitation and there are people that want to return parts of Ukraine to Russia and there are Ukrainians that don't, etc. The real question is not if something's going on, but what is actually going on in Ukraine and who is behind it. Because history shows rarely, if perhaps never, do these sort of international crises just come about by instantaneous combustion. There is often a slow burn that takes place before the fire really gets going. Joining me on the phone from New York is Gerald Celente. He is the publisher of a very well-respected journal, Trends Journal. He and his team have been doing a fair bit of research into this, and they've been talking about the situation in Ukraine for a very long time. Gerald's on the phone. Gerald, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, there's the question. What is actually going on in Ukraine and who is behind it?
Well, the who's behind is very clear. First of all, the what's behind it is that, Ukraine economy is doing terribly for quite a long time, and they're in very deep debt. So if you go back to around November, there was a deal that was cut between Ukraine and Europe, and there was going to be a bit of a merger and a bailout. So if anybody wants to know the who's behind it, all they have to do is go onto YouTube and put in the name Victoria Nuland, N-U-L-A-N-D, Assistant Secretary of State to the United States. And December 13th, 2013, at the National Press Club in D.C., and there she is giving a speech with the sign, a chevron sign over her left shoulder, telling everyone that Ukraine is European and the best path for them to take is to follow that set forth by the International Monetary Fund. Now, me as an American, I'm saying, what's she talking about?
Yeah.
Number one, it's not all European. And number two, how about no foreign entanglements? Why are you involved in this? And then you can listen to the audio tape of Victoria Nuland and the United States Ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt, P-Y-A-T-T. And it was a tape that they picked up that, somebody cut into. And there they are talking about how they're going to overthrow the Yanukovych government and install, quote, Yats. And that, of course, Yatsenyuk, who they put in there now.
And he's the bloke who is currently the Prime Minister of the Ukraine.
Yes. This is a coup that was instigated by the United States and the European Union. It's there for everybody to watch and listen to. And for everyone that really wants the full information, the best that I have followed so far, I would suggest they consider going to paulcraigroberts.org. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts was the former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Ronald Reagan, and very well respected for the work that he does, and he's been following this very closely, as we have. So things are documented here as to who's behind it and what's behind it. And, Michael, to put this all in perspective, when I talked about the economy of Ukraine, the difficulties that they've been having, their economy is about the size of Alabama's. So this has a lot more to do with it than that as well. It also has to do with those neocons in the United States who want to keep spreading military power around the world and again, breaking down the agreements following the fall of the Soviet Union.
Okay,
now they want...
So sorry, I was just going to say, well, look at the neocons in just a moment, because I've got a piece that you've published by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts where he goes through lock and step the agenda they've had for quite a while. But you mentioned just a few minutes ago you had Victoria Nuland, a high-ranking US diplomat, standing before a Chevron sign. Now, of course, Chevron is an oil and gas exploration company based in America. Why is Chevron key or important in this particular situation?
Very good question. Because after I saw the Chevron sign, I started doing some more research. And they just cut a deal with Ukraine in November $10 billion to do hydrofracking. And then I kept searching further, and Shell just cut one recently, too, to do hydrofracking in Poland and in Ukraine. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes over here.
And is it to do with, I've heard also theories to do with oil pipelines and gas pipelines that the Russians particularly make a lot of money out of that go via Ukraine into Eastern Europe and then feed further through into Western Europe. Of course, the Americans now, with shale fracking and all sorts of new forms of oil and gas coming on for an export market, want to tap new markets to make a profit out of that exploration. Is there, again going back to this whole oil and gas theory, is there something a little more to it, perhaps including US export dollars? Because at the same time we're seeing uprisings in Venezuela, for example, a very similar geopolitical hub when it comes to oil and gas exploration.
Well, again, a very good question. In doing more research, I also found that under Hillary Clinton, when she was the head of the State Department, they set up a division within it with 82 employees, headed by the former ambassador of Ukraine, Pascal, which is essentially for one purpose and one purpose only, this new division, and that is to find alternative natural gas and other oil and energy resources for countries throughout Europe and the region that are buying gas from Russia. And again, anyone can look up this information. It's there for everyone to see. So then again, as an American, I say, why are we interfering in Europe and other areas that we have no business doing? And of course, we do have business, and the business is business, and the United States business is supporting those businesses.
And that business is, we're sounding a little bit like Donald Rumsfeld and the known knowns and known unknowns here, but the business is often being driven by the neoconservative element in Washington. Now, as you point out, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former high-ranking official under Ronald Reagan, wrote just the other day that the US's neoconservatives have made a concerted and successful effort to take control of US foreign policy and military doctrine, and with Clinton's regime's attack on Serbia, Washington began eliminating, as he says, governments that are obstacles to its hegemony. And he goes through, for example, Libya. They've tried semi-unsuccessfully so far to put an Islamist coup through Syria. They backed the situation in Georgia. We just mentioned they've been involved with Venezuela lately, on and on. Now, no one's arguing that, the government of Chavez in Venezuela was a terrific bunch of blokes, but equally people are making the point that the catalyst for a lot of the trouble that's popped up there and elsewhere isn't necessarily just of a local making.
Not at all. It is, again, I'm speaking to you from Colonial Kingston, New York. We're about an hour and 45 minutes north of New York City. It's the most historic corner in the United States, the only place there are pre-Revolutionary War buildings on each corner. I'm literally a stone's throw away from the 1777 Senate House. Every one of the founding fathers, including Washington in his farewell address, no foreign entanglements. No foreign entanglements. And all the United States is doing now, as our country is declining at a rapid rate, our infrastructure is rotting, our debt level is over $17 trillion, the gap between the rich and the poor is now the widest of any place in the world, the land of opportunity is gone, it's a multinational takeover, the mom-and-pop stores hardly exist anymore, all we have is Staples and Home Depot, Walmart's, Lowe's, you go up and down the list, CVS, Walmart's, pharmacies are all taken over by the few. And what's the United States doing? Now we have pivot to Asia. We have bases in your country now. And you look at what's going on in the expansion of the military into Africa. So this is totally against everything that this country was founded upon. And I would suggest this. Again, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda that never existed. The Gulf of Tonkin incident that killed over 3 million Vietnamese, took 3 million of our soldiers to war, 60,000 of them dead, hundreds of thousands of lives ruined based on lies. And you mentioned Libya. Look what they've done in Libya. When is this going to stop? And it's not only the United States. You have a government over there that's ready to saddle up the soldiers and move into other countries as well.
And of course, we recently had the situation where not just the United States, but predominantly the US, but under our former Labor Party, Australia and others are ready to go gung-ho into Syria. And it emerged recently that a lot of the talk about Assad dropping chemical weapons on his people was rather misguided, in that it appears that the Turkish Secret Service operating through Islamist forces in Syria were quite exclusively behind the recent incidents.
Yes. And again, what are other... Every country has their own problems. This whole war mentality, we are at a point now, Michael, where I really believe in what Einstein said when he observed that I don't know how the Third World War will be fought, but I do know the Fourth World War will be fought with sticks and stones. What are these countries getting involved in other countries' problems for? What you tell me, the nation that's running so perfectly, and then their politicians have the gall to tell other nations what they should do and how they should run them?
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear on that.
Yeah. I mean, this is insanity what's going on, and what you have are a bunch of sociopaths and psychopaths that call themselves presidents and prime ministers and chancellors and kings and you name it. You show me one victory that has come from the wars that has improved society. How about Afghanistan? Lovely job they've done over there. Oh, look at Iraq. Oh, it's brilliant. Every day, 100 dead, 250 dead, 90 dead. Look what's going on in Libya.
And Egypt.
Libya wasn't bothering anyone.
Absolutely. Now, at the end of the piece in your magazine by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, he makes reference to China, just like Russia, watching what's going on as Western pivots move around not only now Asia, but of course the western side of Russia's border. And China is preparing, it seems, for a potential contact with American forces at some point. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts concludes his article by saying, Washington, overflowing with hubris and arrogance and filled with confidence from its choice by history as the hegemonic power, is driving the world to, as he says, the final war. Does anybody in America, even in the political class, really want to go to that point?
It's hard to say, but as I said, these are psychopaths and sociopaths. You listen to the war drums beating in America and what's going on in Ukraine. You have every two-bit politician out there yelling about we have to do more and we have to get tough with Putin. I mean, they just keep going on with this. And I keep saying to myself, how many more lessons of history do they need? I mean, if Napoleon couldn't pull it off, if Hitler couldn't pull it off, you think Hollande or Cameron or Abbott or Obama is going to take out Russia? I mean, come on. I mean, what are these people thinking?
Now, people listening to us now, Gerald, might be saying, look, I agree with everything you blokes are saying, but, and some people will throw this caveat in, they'll say, look, for all we know, from all we've heard, Putin is a really nasty guy. He's a almost democratic dictator, if you can have such an oxymoron. You wouldn't want to get on Putin's wrong side. We're on the side of right. Might and right is good when it's in the West's hands. Is that a fair assessment, or have we been bastardizing our position of influence over the last few decades?
Again, let's talk about the wars. Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda. Michael, that next cloud you see, that may be that mushroom cloud, Condoleezza Rice. These people should be brought up on war crime tribunals. Who knew what when? And now they're talking about Ukraine. It's not my business. I don't care what goes on in Ukraine. Do I want to see destabilization? No. But again, we have the trains derailing over here all over the place in the States. The infrastructure's rotting, and we're going to fix what's going on in Ukraine? No, these are people, again, and here's the other thing, as an American, The only president in my lifetime that kept our nation out of war was one, and that was General Dwight D. Eisenhower, 5-star general, Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces in World War II, 2-term president. And he warned the American people about the military-industrial complex.
Yep.
That speech is there for everyone to listen to,
yes.
taking over the country. We had no wars when a man was running the country, when a man who saw the destruction of war. What you have are a bunch of little chicken hawks shooting their mouths off that couldn't fight their way out of a paper bag. When men are involved and real women are involved in these things and know the destruction of war, they want peace.
In conclusion then, Gerald, if we could, it seems that not only in the American media but here in Australia and elsewhere, the people are being spun a concerted myth, perhaps a very well-structured story. And it's been going on. There is a lead-up to the conflagration in Ukraine, a lead-up in the media that went through how Russia wouldn't be ready for the Winter Olympics, there'd be terrorist attacks at the Winter Olympics, Putin did this, Putin did that. For years we've had these kind of stories coming through. We've had the same in Egypt, the same in Libya, the same from Syria, the same from... all these countries are just run by despots and they're mad, they're lunacies, poverty's everywhere, people are being eaten by giant dogs. Is the media in part also to blame for the society's gullibility when it comes to probably the real narratives behind some of the great geopolitical struggles of our time?
And that's why I call them prostitutes. You bet. And they're the ones that are selling the propaganda, and who owns the media. And that's another one in the United States. Our media was deregulated by Bill Clinton. Big companies weren't allowed to control the media. Now they do. So it's in their interest to do the bidding of those that are in power. And I'll give you an example. You pick up the New York Times, the big newspaper in the States. They always refer to what's going on in Eastern Europe as, quote, pro-Russian militants. Back in the West, with those people, they were never militants. They were freedom-loving and democratically seeking people that wanted to go into the European civic defense forces.
Two different sides of the same coin.
And you look at the language, they're pro-Russian militants and they're terrorists. And the Crimea elections were held under a barrel of a gun, which was the biggest lie ever told. And that Russia's been in Crimea since what? 1873. They didn't invade. They had between 16 and 25,000 troops there when the problems broke out.
Absolutely. Fascinating talking to you, Gerald. I appreciate your time very much, and if people want to find out more of your work, they can always go on to Trends Journal and read more for themselves. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Hey, thank you, Michael. Hey, thank you, Michael. Hey, thank you.